Air raid sirens have gone off again across Ukraine, one day after Russia launched some of the worst attacks there for months. The mayor of the western city of Lviv says critical infrastructure has again been hit by Russian strikes this morning, causing power blackouts, and the southern city of Zaporizhia was shelled again overnight, with one dead and buildings damaged. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky is expected to ask for more effective air defense systems from the West when he attends a virtual meeting of G7 countries today. Our chief correspondent, John Cookson, is following these developments.
Ukrainian air defense systems are still busy after Russia's blitz yesterday, amid fears Putin may launch another wave of rockets on Ukraine. 12 regions have already been hit. This was the devastation in the central city of Dnipro, where at least 4 people died. This resident, Natalia Nestorenko, says, "I don't understand how in the middle of Europe it happens with impunity. The rockets are flying over civilian cities and everybody's just watching. I don't understand why it can't be stopped," she says. Ukraine's President Zelensky summed up the mood of defiance following Russia's rocket and drone attacks, telling his people, "Ukraine cannot be intimidated, only united even more. Ukraine cannot be stopped," he said. In New York, at a meeting of the UN General Assembly, Russia's attacks on civilian targets was condemned.
Deliberate targeting of civilians is a war crime. By launching missile attacks on civilians, sleeping in their homes or rushing to work, children going to schools, Russia has proven once again that it is a terrorist state that must be deterred in the strongest possible ways.
In a new development, Ukrainian forces have been conducting training exercises near the country's border with Belarus, just as allies Belarus and Russia bolster the other side of the frontier. Without providing any evidence, Belarus's President Lukashenko claims Ukraine is preparing to attack, something Kiev vehemently denies. Ukrainian Army Commander Serhiy Neyev says, "We're here because Belarus and Russia are allied in their aggression towards Ukraine." The head of the UK's GCHQ intelligence service claims Ukraine is turning the tide against Russian forces, but whether the end of this war is in sight or is just in its early stages, no one really knows. John Cookson, Arise News.
And we are joined by Arise Chief Correspondent John Cookson from London. Thank you for that very insightful report. Now, can you bring us up to speed with the latest from Ukraine today?
Hi, ladies. Great to be on Newsday, as always. Well, a little bit more of the same, unfortunately, for the people, long-suffering families in Ukraine. Air raid sirens sounding quite often in Kiev, people sheltering in subway stations and elsewhere. In Lviv, in the west, which has escaped much of the shelling, 2 rockets were fired at a couple of power plants, plunging half the city into darkness and cutting off some water supplies there. Lviv, a fairly quiet city, normally home to hundreds of thousands of refugees, and they're not used to this kind of attack, and this is a new development for Lviv. Down south in Zaporizhia, 12 missiles struck a number of buildings. Again, power plants were attacked, and also a school. We don't know what the casualties are there.
AP Video Hub.
On the other side of things,
Live
the
now replay.
claim to have shot down
AP
4
Direct.
Russian rockets today, but we don't know how many in total have been fired at Ukraine altogether. The head of the GCHQ, which I mentioned briefly in my report there, has given an unusual interview, an unusually frank interview today, saying that he believes the Russians may be getting low on their rocket systems and the ability to attack Ukraine in this way. Each of these rockets and drones costs about between $1 million and $30 million. So yesterday's attack was estimated at costing Russia $400 million, which is a huge amount of money to spend in one day. Although Sir Jeremy Fleming accepted that the Russians were still capable of launching an effective airstrike with impunity in many parts of Ukraine. So not quite as intense as yesterday, but these rounds of attacks are far from over.
Well said, John. Now, Ukraine's President Zelensky is addressing a virtual meeting of the G7. What's he likely to say to these Western leaders?
Yeah, that G7 meeting getting underway in the last few minutes, and Zelensky expected to speak, and we'll see images of that a little bit later. Look, as I said yesterday, he will be calling on the West to get a more effective defense system so that that Ukraine is not so vulnerable from the skies. And although Western nations like the US and Germany have promised these systems, they've been extremely slow in getting them to Ukraine. They still haven't arrived. And then when they actually arrive, the Ukrainians have to be trained on how to use these defense systems. And some experts are saying it will take at least until the spring before they become effective. And my goodness me, so much would have happened in this conflict before spring. So Zelensky will ask for these systems. He might be told that because cruise missiles are being used and they are very accurate, he might be told that countries like Israel have their Iron Dome system in place, and that is still not 100% effective. So even if he does get these sophisticated defense systems, it's no guarantee that cruise missiles and other drones won't get through in the future. But that will be his main message today. Give me more help, more military aid, and that will be addressed to countries like the UK, who've already pledged at least $3 billion in aid.
Now, on the other side of the proverbial battlefield, President Putin has a series of meetings with other prominent leaders. Now, can you tell us a little bit more about this and what he's seeking to achieve now?
Yeah, the Russian leader is often portrayed as having no friends in the world, apart from, say, China, India, North Korea, Cuba. But there are other nations who still want to do business and remain on the right side of the Russians. And indeed, that includes the United Arab Emirates. And Sheikh Zayed has already met with Putin this morning. We don't know exactly what was talked about. There's been no readout of that. But of course, UAE, key in the supply of oil and gas to the rest of the world. And it follows Sheikh Mohammed, effectively the ruler of Saudi Arabia's visit to see Putin recently, and OPEC's recent uptick in the price of oil. So they'll be talking about oil supplies to the rest of the world. I should also tell you that the UAE is one of the big money laundering centers of the world, and many Russian oligarchs have their billions spirited away in banks in the UAE. So no doubt, and probably not on the record officially, they'll be talking about protecting some Russian assets as well.
Well, that definitely sounds like insightful information, John. What do you think the next phase of this war will be? More rocket attacks on Ukraine infrastructure, perhaps?
I think so. I think that's the way things are going. The Monday's attack has a huge impact on Ukraine, not only in terms of loss of human life, which is a cause of terrible tragedy, but also on the infrastructure of Ukraine. And we've seen these rocket attacks continuing today. Putin can't at the moment defeat the Ukrainians on the battlefield, but he can bring terror to the streets of Ukraine and also attack power plants and water plants to disrupt life generally to the Ukrainians. So I believe we'll see more of that in the coming days and weeks.
Well, we certainly are bracing ourselves for what's to come. That's Arise Chief Correspondent John Cookson. Thank you so much for your time today.